Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give a few minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, awesome. I know that if you are one of our attendees, you cannot give me a thumbs up, but I thought I'd ask anyway. My name is Alexis Whittam. I'm the Director of Communications for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And of course, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's session, Youth and Families Experiencing Homelessness, How Can the Response System Adapt? We do these every third Thursday of most months, not every month, but most months in 2022. And we'll try to bring that same date back in 2023 so you can mark your calendars. We've had a lot of great sessions so far. They're up on YouTube. So if you missed any of the previous ones, please check those out. And thank you so much for coming tonight. We're very excited about our panel of experts in this field. I'm going to start off with a little housekeeping, just things you need to know for today's session. We do have live captioning available. This is the automated captioning from Zoom. And so in order to enable that, you should have a CC button at the bottom of your screen, or if you don't see it, hit the 3 dots that say more, and then you can find it and you can click show subtitle. So please add that feature if you need it. We also will work to explain everything on every slide to make sure that it's fully accessible to folks who are attending. Our agenda for tonight is like our agenda for most of these. We're going to do a little data presentation at the beginning from my colleague, Andrew West. Then we are going to move into a panel with our experts that'll go on maybe 40 minutes or so. And then we try to save around 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. You can ask questions in the Q&A function. It's a separate button at the bottom for the webinar. And so the chat is for conversing with other attendees, and then the Q&A function is for asking questions. So please use both of those, but be sure to put questions in Q&A so we know to get to those at the end. As I said, if you're an attendee, your camera and microphone is off. So, if you're cooking dinner or going for a walk, it's very helpful. And those of us who are here on the panel are the only ones visible, but please do connect on chat and in the Q&A box. And then we always want to let folks know the session is being recorded. We put these on YouTube the following day so that they're accessible to those who could not make it tonight. So just wanted everyone to know that we are recording. And then if you want to share on social media, my lovely colleague Shannon Webster will be doing our social media throughout the session and putting up some data and some great insights from our panelists. If you want to join in the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you can see here we have hashtag CCH Ed Series, and then we have our handles for the panelists tonight at CO Local Affairs, at VOA Colorado, and at CO Coalition. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew West, our housing fellow, and he's going to give you a little data overview on families, youth, and homelessness.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexis. Yeah, my name is Andrew West. I am the Housing Policy Fellow with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some data here. So we're going to start by talking about families and children in general, looking at statistics for unsheltered versus sheltered populations, and then talking about some general effects. Excellent. So when we talk about families and children, and when we look at data on this issue, we find that about 30% of the population of people experiencing homelessness is made up of adults and children that are part of a family. In 2020 rather, most recent year that we have good data, 171,575 people in families, which is made up of 55,000 households, identified as homeless. And though this is not always the case, families that are experiencing homelessness are usually headed by a single woman with limited education, who is typically young and has young children. So the most common arrangement is a single mother with her 2 young children. And this is very different from the general population of people experiencing homelessness. When we look at individuals, the demographic is very different, and we actually find that it's mostly single men. The overwhelming majority, or 70% of people experiencing homelessness as individuals, are men. It's also important, I don't know if you were with us last month, but we talked about difficulties in a lot of the data surrounding homelessness, and statistics really vary. I gave you that statistic about 171,000, but I've also found reports of 1.2 million children, or as high as 2.5 million children, which would be about 1 in every 30 children in the US. And a lot of that is done from reports on education, looking at how many kids attend school that are experiencing homelessness. So over time, 2020 was the first time since 2010 that homelessness among people and families did not decrease. It has gradually declined over the last 10 years. And though it doesn't necessarily coincide with total homelessness numbers, this has been decreasing over the last 10 years, except for 2020. Again, we're waiting for 2022 data, and 2021 was tricky due to the pandemic, but it has been on the decline. Next slide here. Thank you. And within this demographic, families with children are less likely to be unsheltered. Part of the reason is because this subgroup is often the targeted priority for decision makers. Children in particular are a priority for homeless service systems, and they're prioritizing getting access to shelter. So 154,904 people and families made up 43.7% of the total sheltered homeless population. So we find that they make up a large percent of what we consider sheltered homelessness. This is the case in Colorado as well. Families are overwhelmingly sheltered, 92.76%, and that makes up about 30% of the total sheltered population. The National Alliance to End Homelessness found that systems were really able to offer year-round bed to only 50% of individuals, but almost 100% of families. So this is a really prioritized population in a lot of ways, and it has been effective. As we've seen, numbers have decreased steadily over the last 10 years and has decreased 27% overall between 2007 and 2020. This is not necessarily the case for young people who are outside of a family. So young people living on their own, who are unaccompanied youth, is what we call that, do not enjoy the same access to services, and 50% of these youth are unsheltered. Next slide here. So effects of homelessness are sort of really all over the place. A lot of these things are really closely tied, but generally experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity has an enormous impact on children's education, health, overall development, and it coincides with higher levels of emotional, behavioral health problems. Children are also more likely to experience separation from their families versus their housed peers, and they experience more school mobility, more likely to repeat a grade, have negative school outcomes and lower academic performance, as well as you can see increased substance use among adolescents. So 71% of children who experience homelessness are reporting drug or alcohol abuse disorders as they become adolescents. We also find that food insecurity is closely tied, and children who are experiencing homelessness go hungry twice as often. And lastly, interactions with the criminal justice system. About half of youth who have experienced homelessness are likely to spend time in juvenile detention or some form of incarceration. And we'll dive a bit more into these effects here on the next slide. First, we could talk about physical and mental health. Children who experience homelessness, whose mothers have suffered from mental illness, are definitely more likely and at a higher risk of experiencing challenges to mental health themselves, and in general for physical health issues. Once you have been in homelessness for longer than 6 months, you find that there are lots of developmental delays, poor health outcomes, including being overweight, being hospitalized. And I thought the statistic on the right side of the slide is really illustrative. More than 1/5 of homeless preschoolers have emotional problems that require professional care, but less than a third receive any treatment. So we find that these effects are really early on. Preschoolers, obviously from a very young age, are seeing these effects of being homeless, but don't receive care, despite the fact that they, as they're experiencing homelessness, are exposed to all sorts of environmental factors that negatively affect health, and are often most likely to need help, are the least likely to receive treatment, unfortunately. And yeah, you see that homeless children are sick at about twice the rate of their peers who are housed. And all of these things are very expensive. It leads to costs that are really avoidable. Sorry. Children's Health Watch estimates that the US will spend 111 billion over the next 10 years in avoidable healthcare costs because of housing instability. Again, if you were with us last week, we talked about emergency services, or last month rather. We talked about how if people don't get the services and treatment that they need, a lot of these costs can go towards, emergency room treatment, ambulance, jail, which are all very expensive, than just providing people with the services that they need. Next, we'll talk about educational outcomes here. So children who switch schools frequently, whether it be due to housing insecurity, changes in housing situation, or homelessness, really tend to perform at lower levels in school and also have learning disabilities. And that's at 3 times the rate of children who are considered non-homeless, and twice the rate of learning disabilities as well. Children who live in an overcrowded household at any time before their 19th birthday are really a lot less likely to graduate from high school, and children who are experiencing homelessness are twice as likely to repeat a grade. Unfortunately, in Colorado, there are lots of students, about 21,000 in Colorado's public schools, who experienced homelessness in just 1 year, and that was between 2019 and 2020. Again, we're still waiting on some more recent data, but we find that there are a high number of students within Colorado that have experienced homelessness. And all of this, in a lot of ways, though unfortunate, makes sense, right? Children need nourishment, they need safety, health, shelter, protection, and experiencing homelessness really takes a lot of those things away. So we do find perhaps predictable outcomes across education and health. And lastly, it is harder to access quality education because housing costs are about 2.4 times higher for public schools in areas that are near public schools with high standardized test scores, so high performing schools, which is obviously linked to quality of education. And we got 2 more slides here. We'll talk about the foster care system really quickly, just because although it is designed to provide temporary housing and care for children and adolescents until they can be reunited with family or taken in by relatives, too often youth pass through the foster care system and can fail to find permanent homes and can really transition between living situations, and many do end up in homelessness. About 36% of homeless youth age 21 or under had been in foster care prior to becoming homeless. So you do see that these things are very closely linked. And once they're emancipated at 18, about 1/5 of them will become homeless at that very moment. So again, we see nationwide as well, about half of the homeless population has spent some time in the foster care system. 1/4 of youth that exit foster care became homeless within a year. So it is a very close relationship between these 2 things. And what we need to do, and we'll hear some solutions later, but we need to provide stability to families to avoid foster care in the first place, while also providing resources and services for those who are exiting so they don't experience homelessness. And lastly, all of these effects are exacerbated along racial and gender, sexuality, demographics. youth that are identifying as LGBTQ plus that are Black are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness than their white counterparts. Between 20 to 45% of youth experience homelessness that are LGBTQ plus, compared to about 7 to 10%. So really staggering numbers about just the sheer number of people that experience homelessness within minority and vulnerable groups. Homeless youth that are LGBTQ plus represent about 40% out of all young people who are experiencing homelessness. So really exacerbated along those lines as well. And a third of Black and American Indian or Alaskan Native children, and a quarter of Latinx children live below the poverty line in the US, compared to 1 in every 9 white children. So again, we see that all of these things within families as well. Black families in 2019 made up about half of all families experiencing homelessness. And again, poverty, very closely tied to homelessness. So as we see that poverty is divided along racial lines, we will see that replicated in homelessness as well. I know a lot of this can be depressing, but we will pass it off to the panel to look towards some more solutions. But one thing I want to mention really quickly is just that all of these health educational outcomes can be reversed. If people do get services and are provided with housing from an early age, they are able to get better. They are able to get higher educational outcomes. So just one thing I want to highlight and hopefully end on a bit more positive note. And I can pass it back here.
Yeah, we had one more slide, so I'll just jump into that real quick. We did want to talk about a couple of recent policy wins. So Cover All Coloradans, HB 22-1289 provides comprehensive public health insurance coverage to children, pregnant and postpartum and undocumented Coloradans, and makes several other critical investments in perinatal care in Colorado. Then we have modifications to the Colorado Works program, which basically updates and improves TANF, known here as Colorado Works, and it provides an annual cost of living adjustment. So that's finally going up. And then as well as eviction legal defense funding, HB 22-1329. It's not a large amount of money, $500,000, but it does provide additional legal assistance for Colorado families going through the eviction process. And we know that if we can prevent people from homelessness, we're going to have way better outcomes than if they are evicted. So did want to talk about some recent policy wins that we're going to see implemented in the near future. All right, so I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists today. Thank you so much, Andrew, for covering the data. So I will start with Angel Hurtado. She began her career with Volunteers of America in 2008. She holds the responsibility for the overall operations of youth-specific programming, residential facilities, youth and family homeless programs, and the service component in VOA's affordable housing. This year, she was awarded VOA's National Award for Excellence in Leadership and Administration. Ms. Hurtado's work history prior to Volunteers of America includes over 20 years of working for several community mental health centers and community center boards across the state. Additionally, her volunteer work includes her being on the board for 9 years at Rocky Mountain Communities, a nonprofit organization that focuses on developing affordable housing and providing resident services. She received both her BA in psychology and her MBA from the University of Northern Colorado. So welcome, Angel. All right, Cesar Jimenez is the Director of Family Support Services for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. The Family Support Services Department here helps to link families experiencing homelessness, including families with children under the age of 18, to housing and additional services. Cesar serves on the EID, Equity, Inclusion, Diversity Committee at CCH, and he'll tell you lots more about what Family Support Services does here at CCH when a little bit later. So welcome, Cesar. And finally, we have Brittany Wade, a licensed clinical social worker with a Master of Social Work from The Ohio State University, and a passion for transition age youth. With over 15 years of experience working with youth and families in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, Brittany has expertise in both systems level coordination and direct services. In Brittany's current position with the State of Colorado Department of Local Affairs, Office of Homeless Initiatives, Brittany leads the Office of Homeless Youth Services. In this role, she administers rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, host home, and other supportive housing programs throughout the state. utilizes best practices such as Housing First and youth-centered program models, and collaborates with state and local government, continuum of cares, nonprofit organization, and other youth stakeholders to address the unique needs of youth experiencing homelessness. So welcome to all of you. All right, I am going to stop sharing so that we can all sort of just have our conversation time. And I just wanted to start off with sort of a general question. We try to do this at the beginning of each of our sessions. You know, we just saw this data presentation on the unique experiences of youth and families who are unhoused or at risk of homelessness. Is there anything in the data that was missing that you think may not have told the whole story, or that surprised you as someone who works in the sector? And that's for anyone.
I guess I would say, hi, I'm Angel, everybody. I guess I would say we don't have very good data on returns to homelessness. And I also think that depending upon what definition is used for homelessness, whether it's the Hearth Act definition or the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, there's like some concerns with the data. The systems together aren't working. Like the school system doesn't report to the homeless management information system. So we don't really have a good grasp of what youth and families homelessness really looks like. And the fact that like these are people that we can count. And we all say this all the time. These are people that we can count and that we can see. There are some unseen, a lot of unseen youth and a lot of unseen families out there. So just to throw that out there is like, that is definitely a known throughout the community.
I totally agree with what you said, Angel. The other thing I think that sometimes the data for our youth experiencing homelessness is missing is that it looks a lot different for youth who are experiencing homelessness than it does for adults. You know, adults are more often seeking out actual shelters, whereas our young people are more frequently couch surfing or kind of cobbling together some different things that may or may not involve public services. And so kind of taking that into account when we're thinking about the numbers and thinking about what we're looking at there for the data.
Would also add in terms of equity, I feel like the Latino community has also struggled with even accessing resources that are available to the rest of the community who are experiencing homelessness. I'm not sure if everyone knows here, but HUD has a rule that we can't really provide full HAP or housing assistance payment for some of our community members who don't have legal status here in the United States. So I feel like they're definitely affected by that. So I would want to know like who are, or how many of our vulnerable community members are being turned away from these resources that we are able to provide. And if we can get data on that, I think it would shed a lot of light on some of the community members that we're just totally missing in these resources that we have available.
Thank you. Those are all excellent points. And I think that's such a hard part of this work is that we're always saying, you know, these are the numbers we have, and we actually think the numbers are far worse because we can't capture a lot of people who aren't in our systems. We can't capture people who are couch surfing properly. You know, we don't capture youth who aren't engaging as well, or folks who English is a second language and, you know, don't have access to services. So thank you for that. And you know, that's something that we always want to be sure to keep an eye on. And it tells us that this issue is larger than even that data from that we saw earlier likely shows. I want to sort of jump in with a question for Brittany, because you serve as the homeless program specialist for the Office of Homeless Youth Services for the Department of Local Affairs for the state. You know, maybe you can give us our best sort of big picture look at some of the current statewide efforts that are effective in serving youth and families. And if there's anyone watching this session who's looking for services, sort of how does the state start from a big perspective before we talk more about, you know, into the organizations that are sort of doing it at more of a local level or obviously statewide, but in a, you know, only one part of the solution.
Sure. And I think what we really try to do is look at our funding and know that there's never going to be a one size fits all solution, and know that we really need solutions that are going to run the gamut and be anything from some short-term financial assistance all the way to things that are going to be permanent supportive housing options. And knowing that we want to bolster those up some more. And so with those permanent supportive housing options, partnering with some of our other state agencies to make sure that we're able to provide some of those wraparound supports. So in this current year, CDHS spent about 31 million on behavioral health supports for individuals at risk or without stable housing. So knowing that some of those resources are available and that we're really trying to work with our other state agencies for that. And knowing that, again, the different kinds of programs that we are going to offer are going to vary based on where you are. You know, in a metro area, it's a lot easier to stand up a brick and mortar shelter and to have the resources and volunteers and support to be able to keep that running. But in some of our rural areas, that's not always possible. So for our young people, we've turned a lot to host home programming and have really tried to bolster that in terms of some of those emergency supportive housing options. And then thinking about our individuals and families who may be coming out of institutional settings, whether or not that be a correctional setting or hospitalization or a nursing home. We did just recently release a new RFA. It's called the Olmsted RFA, but is really geared at supporting populations coming out of institutions. So should anyone be working with young people coming out of institutions, this may be a great RFA for you to think about applying for, because it can come along with some housing vouchers and support it, like funding for some of that. So it might be a really great one for everyone to look into, so we can provide some of those long-term supports for our young people coming out of institutional settings. The other thing we're doing is providing support to our partners throughout the state and funding to be able to open up some new housing options. So just this week, Together, who is based out of Boulder and was formerly called Attention Homes, is building a supportive housing structure in Rhino. And so the State Housing Board just approved that this week. So that's another thing that we are working on. And then I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just in terms of data, we don't have great data. And so across the state, we're really working with our partners to try and get some of that data so we have a better idea of how many of our young people are experiencing homelessness. And so El Paso County is actually incredibly close to having quality data for our youth down there experiencing homelessness. And is something that we are continuing to work with all our agencies, whether or not it's family or youth, though youth is kind of my niche. And then, you know, we have the usual FUP, so our family unification program that works with our young adults. And with that, there is another portion of FUP that works with families that are involved in the child welfare system, so like a family FUP. So those are all things that we at this state are supporting and really trying to make sure that we have enough of those vouchers and advocating for ourselves with HUD to see if we can get some more of those. I'd say that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's a lot. Thank you for getting it all there. So Angel, we know that there are many levels of service for youth and families experiencing homelessness. As someone who works on the front lines of youth and emergency services for the Volunteers of America, how does VOA approach services for youth and families when compared to the services you provide to the general population?
That's a good question. So I'm going to separate our youth, our transitional age youth from our families, because there's two separate kind of programming models. Sheltering, first of all, for families is a big part of what we do on the front lines. And we have a family voucher program that is where families, so men or women with children, can obtain a voucher to either the family motel, which is located on Xavier and Colfax, or they can attain a voucher for the contract motel. The system is not perfect. However, over the last 3 weeks, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of families that we've served. There are up to, so the family motel is full with 35 units there, but we've seen about 250 families that we're housing through the contract motels through that program. I say that we've seen some families come from Venezuela, so I would say that they're being bused here at times. So it is an exploding population right now that really hosts, and Denver Human Services hosts as a Office of Housing Stability. We're working with to try to mitigate some of the trauma that we spoke about earlier in the presentation, to make sure that we address this sheltering concern. And it's different from the other sheltering options because families have more than one person. It's not like a single bed for a male or a single bed for a youth. They need to have more than enough space for the family to be served in a positive way. So I would say that first for families. Then for youth, our transition age youth population, we have programs that allow us to utilizing the coordinated entry system. We have rapid rehousing programs and we have permanent supportive housing programs, so that we're able to get the youth and then put them into housing and support services wrapped around. So rapid rehousing is a model that can help with rental assistance and support services for 1 to 2 years. The permanent housing youth program is a permanent voucher for them, but those are all scattered site and then they're in the community, and preferably in the community that they choose. And that's at Bannock Youth and Family Center. And on the family side, we also have rapid rehousing programs at Bannock Youth and Family Center. We have access to what's called the Local Preference Program, which is a Denver Housing Authority partner. And we partner with CCH or Warren Village or other places, Family Tree, to get names from the community in order to obtain a voucher through Denver Housing Authority. Those vouchers, there's only 40 of them. So you can imagine the need out there. If there's 250 families in the contract motels, you can imagine that those 40 vouchers are not enough annually. So we're trying to obviously solve for a problem that has been just dramatically growing and growing and growing. And the only solution to homelessness really is housing.
Thank you, Angel. And I'll say Volunteers for America is statewide, correct? And has services throughout the state?
We do have services throughout the state. My focus mainly is in the Denver metro area, but we have affordable housing throughout the state. We have services for veterans, and we also have the core program that's funded through Division of Housing through Brittany's agency, which is a Colorado reentry program. And we have shelters in Durango for domestic violence. So Northern Colorado services, we have services throughout the state. So you're free to visit our website at www.voacolorado.org.
Great, thank you. And that's a note we get a lot, that the benefit of these webinars being online. We used to do these in person, and when COVID broke, we started doing them online, and we sort of have just maintained it because a lot of our folks who don't live locally want to know about services and opportunities. And so we really want to emphasize that there are programs and solutions available throughout the state, particularly through organizations like yours. So thank you. So Cesar, you work in family support services at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and specifically with family units that are a parent and then children, and it's a combination of multiple services. So can you tell us how you fulfill the needs of families in Colorado and some of the resources that you see that are the most needed for the families that we serve?
Yeah. So currently we serve over 420 families. Most of our families are in receiving rental assistance through various vouchers. So FUPS, 811s, project-based. We used to have a rapid rehousing program, but now transitioned to a permanent supportive housing program. So the voucher administration is actually handled by our housing assistance department, but we provide the main support services. With our clinical team, we also provide clinical services. So recently we've kind of shifted our model or our approach of support services. We have a lot of our clients who are based on the property side. So CCH has, I think it's hard to track now, but I think over 15 properties. Of those 15, we have 8 primary properties who we provide support services to. So we try to keep our families engaged in some of the activities we hold in some of our properties. We have a property out in Blue Spruce recently one of our case managers holding like parenting classes, and we try to, every holiday we try to have like a Christmas donation event. We also try to have like a back to school event. Those have always been great for our families. And I will say that after, and I can't say after COVID, because I think I still think we were living in COVID. It's been hard to re-engage with clients. I think a lot of folks are still coming, they're still really reserved in their approach, and face-to-face contact is still questionable for some of our families. But I think we were trying really hard to re-engage with their families, try to build that trust again. I can't speak for everyone here, but I think staffing was also an issue. We lost a lot of our staff members. We're trying now to build back our capacity to provide services. So I think our main focus has really primarily been on reestablishing our level of engagement at different properties. We also have some scattered site clients. We have about 251 scattered site clients. So families who live in private units through different landlords that we have here in the Denver metro area. So we're doing our best to just try to re-engage, see what the client needs are right now. I think the primary need has always just been around just food resources. We have some grants that are able to cover that through our family's PSH program, as it's an eligible expense. But sometimes we got to get creative. We got to leverage our resources in the community and see how we can, accommodate some of these needs that we can't cover through our grants or even through our general budget line. So our staff have done an amazing job of leveraging agency resources, collaborating with different agencies, some of us here. And I think it's just about, I think right now it's just about collaboration to try and fulfill the needs of our clients. I think we just got to work together, and moving forward, we'll build new working relationships. I think one primary great example of this is the Rehousing Collaborative program that we've established here at CCH. We have our partners with Gathering Place and Dolores Project. They're providing the support services, and then housing assistance here with CCH is providing the voucher administration. We're leveraging our assets and combining that to better support the clients who really were most affected by COVID. And overall, I think just housing, the availability of housing within Denver Metro has really been a struggle for us. We have the resources, but we just don't have the inventory to house some of our clients scattered site, because landlords either want more than what the voucher payment standard or FMR level is, or they put a lot of barriers to housing. We're looking at barriers for background, credit. Unfortunately, some of our clients have a lot of that on their background. And I do see a question here on the Q&A about certain felonies. I will say that some of our COC programs don't have restrictions on an individual that might have a sex offense. I know that some of the Division of Housing vouchers do, but there's still options. There's still hope for some of those clients that do have certain issues with their background. They just need to come through the coordinated entry system. So I hopefully, and I think I'm getting the name right here, Chantel, hopefully, you've entered into the VI SPDAT, and if you haven't, I would recommend that you go to someone that can really do that for you, and maybe get the help that you need.
Thanks, Caesar. Yeah, and we'll get to those questions. I see questions from Chantel and Missy in the Q&A. So we'll just stick to a little big picture for the next 20 minutes or so, and then don't worry, we will get to your questions, absolutely. So you mentioned the Gathering Place and Dolores Project. We wanted to know sort of if someone here is looking to direct a family or youth to services, what organizations do you recommend connecting with, of people who aren't on this panel, that are great places for getting that entry into services that folks may not have yet? And that's for anyone.
I would say Family Promise, Urban Peak. Family Promise for families, obviously, and Urban Peak for youth.
We partner with Rosandum. So it's a shelter for survivors of domestic violence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be domestic violence. If you come in and they do an intake and they see that maybe perhaps you'd be a better fit, we also have a staff member who can do VI SPDATs there on site. I think they're there every Tuesday. We used to have walk-in services, but again, due to staffing shortages, we couldn't staff that anymore. But we're trying to get that restaffed so that we can provide services here, walk-in services at either 2100 Broadway or 2111 Champa here in downtown Denver.
Right. I also see Kathy Verdier says the place in the Springs for youth. So put that one down as well.
And together then up in Boulder, or in Fort Collins, you've also got the Matthews House, who's providing a lot of services. Caris is out in Grand Junction. Housing Solutions are the Southwest. So, I mean, there are places across the state that are providing supports to our young adults.
Thank you. Yeah, to speak specifically about, we had the slide on foster youth, and we know that youth who are unaccompanied are a really particular population. If anyone is able to sort of speak more to broadly support youth and in foster care or after foster care, or any other services tailored to at-risk populations, including, you know, LGBTQ and youth of color, that we find that, you know, I know that this session is sort of youth and families, and those aren't always in the same, treated the same way in the system, but, you know, to specifically ask about youth.
I think one of the things that at the state we're doing to try and address some of our young adults coming out of child welfare is really partnering a lot with the Chafee programs across the state. So through CDHS, and making sure that those workers are all really aware of resources for our young adults coming out of the system. FYI vouchers, or foster youth to independence vouchers, are another thing that's coming up. They are very similar to our FUP vouchers, but those are ones where the Chafee workers or that county can run their own wait list for it. So there are sometimes some benefits to them being able to apply directly with HUD and partner with a voucher administrator to receive those. I do think that we often, this is my own aside, but I think we do often focus a lot on our young adults coming out of foster care and really leave behind our young adults coming out of juvenile justice, and providing support to them or interventions that are really geared at them. And so it's something that I hope that we are able to continue to drum up more and more resources for.
Okay, thanks, Brittany. I wanted to actually go back. I just, Caesar, you were talking about the VI SPDAT. Do you think you could explain what that is and how that plays into people's access to services? Because not everyone might be familiar with that, or if someone else feels like they'd rather answer that question.
Yeah, I can definitely take a stab at it. I think we can definitely spend hours talking about VI SPDAT, but in a nutshell, I think it's just a way to assess the needs of someone who's experiencing certain hardships. Mostly it's homelessness, and really see if they're adequate more for, you know, PSH level, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, basically analyzing what their need is. Now, you know, I don't want to get into nuances of how that work, like how it works necessarily, or if it's a fair system. Again, we can go into detail about that, but it's just an evaluation system to link services to the individuals who are experiencing hardships in our community. I think it was aimed to streamline and expedite the nature in which we connect clients in the community to the resources that we have in different agencies. But I'm sure Brittany or Angel can speak more on that as well.
HUD requires us to has a continuum of care, requires us to have a coordinated entry system. And so an MDHI is the 7 counties, and then there's the balance of state, and, you know, Colorado has Springs has their own, and then the other up north has their own now. But they require to have a coordinated entry system. So they have to develop this system. And then the assessment tool that was chosen was the VI-SPDAT. It's a vulnerability index, specialized determination assessment tool or something like that. But there's different times for it. Like there's a transition age youth one, there's a family one, and then there's an individual one. And again, Caesar was talking about like, it might not be what the best tool in the world, but really the VI-SPDAT was designed to assess the vulnerability of people that are most likely to die on the street. And to take those individuals and to assess them for permanent supportive housing. We adapted it to rapid rehousing and whether you get services or not. And so again, as Caesar's right, we don't want to get into the nuances of that, but it's an amazing thing to try to do for a coordinated entry system. But what that means is that, so these people that are prioritized through our system, there's a lot of people who aren't. And these resources are so precious that they're trying to house the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Angel. I think that is about as concise as someone can capture it. So I really appreciate it. It's very complex. And once again, you know, we all know that if there was enough permanent supportive housing or housing for everyone, we wouldn't need to go through prioritizing people in these systems, right? And unfortunately, because there's a limited number of resources, you know, HUD asks folks to prioritize based on need, and that means that certain folks get prioritized. And you know, once again, housing solves homelessness, and you know, we work within the systems and the supports that we have as organizations that work to end homelessness. So that's sort of where we're at. To jump sort of more into the families and the families with younger children, we were curious, what roles do school systems and programs like Head Start play in supporting youth and families living in poverty and or experiencing homelessness?
I think they play a huge role. Obviously, they're almost like a first line of defense of identifying families and being able to interact with them and link them up with services. You know, I think we obviously need more money toward it, with McKinney-Vento being an unfunded mandate in our schools. And McKinney-Vento essentially says that there needs to be someone who is a coordinator for families experiencing homelessness in each of the schools. But often it's someone who is wearing 17 other hats in that school system and is not always totally able to provide that level of support. But the school systems are really able to identify our families experiencing homelessness. And one of the cool programs that we've been able to do through the state is called Next Step 2 Gen. And we've been able to provide rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention dollars to 14 different school districts across the state, and interact with their McKinney-Vento liaisons and then a housing provider to provide funding to support families in the school system that are experiencing homelessness. And so I think it's been a really, really great way to identify families and then hopefully be able to look at how is that young child's attendance doing, how are their grades doing, if we're able to provide some stable housing for them. And so it hasn't been going on for particularly long, so we don't have super robust data, but I think anecdotally, we're really seeing that we've been able to make some really great impacts in the young people's lives that we've supported with this program.
I love this question, Alexis, so I'm just gonna, so obviously adverse childhood experiences affect so many things. You know, if the higher your ACE score, the more likely you'll be a victim of violent crime, the more likely you're being a domestic violence relationship, drug using, alcoholism, generational cycles of poverty, more likely to be raped. I mean, the adverse childhood experiences causes so much damage to a family, to a child. And I feel like Head Start in particular is an equalizer. It is one of the tools that we have in our toolbox to be able to treat the family holistically and to take them out of the situation that they're in, provide wraparound services to the family in so many different ways, to allow the parent to learn how to be the best teacher for their child instead of these other external elements. So we have a Head Start program at Volunteers of America, and we just we support it with case management services. We support it with food services. And really being able to see that, okay, so 70% of the children or the families in our Head Start program are monolingual, their parents are monolingual, Spanish to English. So how do we get them to make sure that they're able to be able to succeed in the future? We can help them with learning how to advocate for themselves. We can help them to get jobs. We can help them with transportation. So if you are a case manager and you have a family with a child from, who's prenatal all the way up to 5 years old, get them into a Head Start program, because though you also have a homeless preference in Head Start. Get them into one of those programs, because Head Start is a great equalizer and probably one of the best prevention tools that is really underutilized. Sorry, I just get really excited.
No, please don't apologize. All the information we needed was right there. And Caesar, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add more to the education piece, at least here within our FSS department. And we do have a Renaissance Children Care Center, which we do provide quality daycare and education services. I feel like a lot of our issues too have been around affordable care for some of our children, especially in low-income families who want to be more self-sufficient. You can't be self-sufficient because you can't get a job if you still have to take care of your children. And honestly, it comes down to affordability and availability. I think it's been saturated so much that it's impossible for some of our clients to even achieve that goal, even if they wanted to. At RCC, we have a clinician on site who can help some of our children with some of the vicarious or direct trauma associated with some of the issues that are going on in the household. So we're trying to right now focus more on that, because we understand that sometimes, like Angel said, it's a cyclical thing of experiencing homeless. We see some of the clients who were in our program years ago are now our clients now who were dependents in a household. So we're slowly trying to provide more resources, aim more resources in that direction, because I think oftentimes we just get caught up in that triage work that we're doing. Like, how can we prevent this family from being evicted, when we are just so caught up in that we really don't focus on the other family members who are also in that household. So we're trying to aim our direction there. I know out of COVID, there was a lot of triage work that we were doing, but we're really trying to now focus our direction on the other family members as well.
And Caesar, I'll take that segue to say, sounds like COVID-19 had an impact in how you were treating families previously. As we're 2.5 years in, but with really changing circumstances now of how nationally and statewide and locally we're dealing with COVID-19. How have folks seen the pandemic impacting families and youth who may be at risk of or experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, if we can start with the education piece, a lot of our families didn't have the technology that are available to other families that are better off, right? They didn't have iPads or even cell phones to do some of these online classes. I know most of the school districts were able to provide some iPads, but then we're talking about, do households have internet, right? Some people take that for granted. We have to understand that most of our families don't have internet in their homes. And I think we saw a lot of progression in the education that our kids were seeing. That was hard. Also, a lot of our clients did lose some of their employment that took them years just to try and obtain. And we were also facing, a lot of our clients were facing eviction. I know there was a moratorium, but really there was a lot of education that we had to do with our landlords to try and educate them, like, hey, we really can't have an eviction going on right now because our clients are having hardship due to the COVID-19 and losing their income because of that. So I think it was a lot of trauma around potentially losing housing. It was a lot of anxiety for parents with their kids being at home and not really getting the education that they needed, and also the lack of resources available to them that other families might have had during the COVID-19 period. So again, for us, is just re-engaging with families, seeing what their needs are, and then just building that trust again and say, hey, we're here for you. I know that we haven't had the time to do a lot of face-to-face, but we want to get to that point again, and really, what are your needs? So even though I mentioned those 3 main points, I think there are other issues that we still haven't found out because of just the inability to see some of them face to face, or their hesitation to see us face to face. I think we also have to honor that. We can't force clients to receive case management services. We have to honor that they have their priorities too, and then we have to also ease into that. So I think that's just across the board, just dealing with that hesitation from some of our clients. And sometimes, yeah, it is frustrating because we want to help them, but we also have to honor their request. Yeah.
I think it's really impacted a lot of those informal supports that families and young people may have come in contact with, either through school or other social gatherings that they may be at, which then I think leads to a lot more engagement and or not necessarily engagement, but leads to a lot more like literal homelessness for our young people, because they are not able to couch surf, or people are not comfortable with them coming into their home, and creates a lot more barriers for them kind of coming up with their own informal system of maintaining a roof over their head.
Okay, so we're going to move into the Q&A questions, but before I jump into those, some of them are really specific, which is awesome. I'm glad that we're able to have answers for folks right here, right now. But before we do that, are there any like closing thoughts, resources, or topics, or anything else that you want to share before we jump into those specific questions? Okay, we look good to go. If you think of anything at the very end, go ahead and let us know. So the first question I wanted to ask was actually one that was in the chat and didn't make it into the Q&A box, but it was about vouchers. So why are there so few vouchers for so many in need? Why are there so few of the available vouchers being used? Is there any other option besides, a lottery, essentially?
I would say that the eviction moratorium had something to do with it. When we have a family housing program, Rita, I don't know if you know that, but you and I can talk more about it at one of our youth meetings. But we house families. I've mentioned like the 40 units we get of Denver Housing Authority placements. And throughout COVID, when the moratorium was going on, we didn't get any traction in that program. So I would say the shocking number is because of the moratorium, and then maybe more are coming out. But there are things such as local preference programs that housing authorities can participate in, and they can actually dictate how they disperse. It's not always just through the lottery. So, that's one way I would suggest learning about that piece.
I think in terms of vouchers across the state, we do often have to, we get a certain allotment of funding from HUD that kind of dictates what we're able to do and how many vouchers we're able to put out there. We do also have some state housing vouchers that we're able to supplement in there, and some other special projects that we're able to do as well, but that does often really dictate what we're able to do. And as we're trying to look at a disbursement and kind of an equity lens, we do really try to get those across the state. And I think what we're seeing by and large across the US, not even just across Colorado, is that landlords are charging astronomical amounts of money for rent, and it's becoming harder and harder and harder for people that get a voucher to then find a place to utilize that voucher. And that's definitely something that we recognize, and we're really trying to keep up with fair market rent values. But because they are growing so much and HUD only allows us to go up incrementally, that does really sometimes tie our hands a little bit in terms of how much we are able to go up in any given area for the rent portions we're able to pay. So I do think that that's had a huge impact on people actually being able to lease up and utilize their vouchers.
Yeah, and if I can speak to the question also around just when we have clients in our wait list through for example, Section 8 or housing choice and vouchers, sometimes we lose contact because the clients have lost their phone or they've changed addresses. So we've tried and even in that time period where you have to try these various methods to try and contact the clients or potential clients, it really kind of bottlenecks that into an issue where, yeah, we're spending a lot of time trying to do our due diligence to try and contact these clients that have been selected for these vouchers, but the communication there is missing because, you know, either they've changed their phone number or moved addresses. So I think that's also a factor into that, and I've seen that when I was with housing assistance department here at CCH.
Thanks, Caesar. Another question that we have to get more into sort of specific questions. Chantel wants to know about families who have a mom or dad that has a felony, and particularly sex offender as a felony as one of the questions of being able to access services. So Angel, I think you started to answer that, or maybe Caesar earlier. Does anyone have a good response to that?
Yeah, so I know like the housing choice vouchers does have that prerequisite as part of it. You know, no one with the sex offense on the record could qualify for the program, but there are other opportunities, especially through COC programs that don't have that requirement necessarily on there. And again, I would then encourage them to just go through the VI SPDAT process, go through the One Home Coordinated Entry System, because a lot of that stuff is filtered out, even though if you might have, you know, something in your background, they're like, well, you know, maybe they're not adequate for this services, but we can connect them to this services. So I wouldn't say that totally out of the question to receive services. It's just getting into the right, I don't know, in VI SPDAT basically, in the One Home Coordinated Entry System to have that figured out for you.
I will add, this is sort of an additional thing, but some of the sex offender registry information did change last year. There was a change in legislation. So if that is an old conviction, that it can get taken off of someone if it's a juvenile conviction or an older conviction. So there may be an opportunity to check with a free legal clinic in order to figure out, because that policy did change last year on sex offenders. So just extra information there. We also have a question from an attendee about folks who make too much to be in the income restricted housing, but don't make enough for low income housing that goes by the tax credit housing. Do we have suggestions for folks who sort of aren't eligible for these typical services, but are struggling with housing in you know, this current environment here in Denver and in Colorado, which recently it came out in the most recent data as the 8th least affordable state in the country. So we know that's Denver and Boulder. That's also mountain towns. That's also, you know, that's a statewide number. So does anyone have suggestions for that attendee?
One thing I would say is that not all tax credits are the same. Not all tax credit properties are the same. There are some that are more affordable than others. The problem is that there's no coordinated way to get to and find. So just because you might not qualify for one because their rent is at the highest of the fair market rent doesn't mean that you might not qualify for another. So I would continue to search through the tax credit properties, because some of them have the requirement you make 2 times the rent. Some of them have the requirement you make 2.5 times the rent. So I would definitely say that not all tax credit properties are the same, nor do they charge the same rents. So that might be an option if you find one that charges a lower rent. Also, outside the metro area is where we find a lot of them more affordable housing options for our families and youth.
Yeah, I'll echo Angel on that one. We've seen a lot of our clients even move up to Longmont because it's more affordable. They get more for their money. I know it's a long way out there, but you know, we have seen successful clients where we just really get to know the area and are comfortable there. So looking outside of the Denver metro area, I will say a lot of our resources are in the Denver metro area. So it's hard for some of our clients to move away from the areas they know, from the resources that they know. But, you know, unfortunately, this is a reality of the market. And sometimes we do have to look outside of our comfort zone and look at other options. A lot of landlords, specifically in the area, are willing to work with us. We've seen them really reduce even some of their contract rents to make it more affordable for some of our clients to lease up with them. Even negotiating on the prices has always been, we've had better luck in the northern area recently.
The other thing to think about is there are organizations that have funding to provide support with like a first month's rent and deposit kind of thing, as opposed to something that may be more ongoing. So if you're able to find one of those properties that you can get in, there may be an organization that can also help with some of that like front end payment, because I know that's a huge burden for a lot of people to be able to get into housing. So thinking through maybe utilizing some of those resources to help yourself get to a place of stability.
Great. Thank you all. Those are great resources. We have a question from Missy. It says, I am trying to help a student with housing. The student is 17 and is here with no guardian. They are in our school system as homeless. I went to the homeless liaison, but there were no permanent shelter suggestions. My wife and I are willing and would like to house this kid to help them and can get them on their feet. I was wondering if this is something we can do or if there are legal issues with that.
I hesitate a little bit with my answer, as I'm not an attorney to tell you whether or not there are legal issues with something. But and also as a point of clarification, is this like an unaccompanied refugee minor, or are we talking about just like an unaccompanied minor?
And the question I just have is here with no guardian. If Missy's still around, maybe they can put in the chat, but it says here with no guardian. So.
I mean, I do think that there are some places that you can start. You know, technically in the state of Colorado, at the age of 15, young adults can consent to their own shelter. Okay. And so it might be helpful to start with like your local shelter. So if you're in the Metro Denver area, starting with Urban Peak to see if they may be able to provide some support. There are some stipulations after X amount of time. They do need to be like working on reunification with parent, but they may be a really great place to start in terms of some of those guidelines. You know, CDHS may be another resource in terms of figuring out what some of your parameters that you may need to operate within, because there are some tricky logistics. And while reunification may not happen, the law dictates that we have to always like work toward that. And so I think just maybe contacting some of those resources and figuring out if even the McKinney-Vento liaison at the school can help you navigate like healthcare resources and getting that young person signed up for even SNAP or Medicaid, because they are eligible and are able to do that. Yeah, and Lauren Rafter just had a good point that Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center may be able to provide some support with that as well.
Missy, the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to get resources and to, you know, be the community that we all want to be. So.
Thank you both for those answers. So we have someone who asked, what times are COC open for incoming people to get help? I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is it is that for the VOA or for CCH? Someone know? Okay. I'm gonna leave that one. If
it's probably for the VI SPDAT, so like looking at locations that do VI SPDATs. I'm not very confident if I were to tell you, because a lot of these places that we knew had VI SPDAT services have lost staffing that could do that. So I had clients that I would refer, but then they would come back and say, hey, they don't do that anymore. So unfortunately, I really can't answer that question personally. I can't. I'm not sure if Angel or Brittany might know more information on that.
The long and short of it is there's not like a great centralized list of who's offering what when. And often most places are not able to do a VI SPDAT with you unless you are engaged with them in services. So something to kind of take into consideration that often it's not like a walk-in kind of thing.
One thing I would say is you could start with the type of population that you are working with. Like if you're an unaccompanied transition or a transition-age youth, maybe start with like an urban place, seeking out some services there. If you're a family, you know, and you're experiencing homelessness, maybe go through the family voucher program, or also the Gathering Place serves women and children. So I would say that there are, so start with the population specific, and then hopefully there's an opportunity to get in through there. I know that for families, Family Promise has offered to do some of that kind of outreach. We have them outreaching at our family motel. So I know that MDHI, the Metro Denver Homelessness Initiative for the Denver metro area, is working on this piece. So, but we're not there yet as a community, and that's very sad.
Thank you, Angel. And thank you to all of our panelists tonight. We do have one more question from Cindy in the chat, but I'm actually going to let my colleague Aubrey answer that as she closes us out, because she's the best person to answer it, I think. So I'm going to hand it over to Aubrey and let her close us out today. So thank you.
Thanks, Alexis, and thank you to our fantastic panelists. That was some really great conversation and information. I hope it'll be helpful to everyone here tonight. And there was a question about an affordable housing ballot measure. So if I'm assuming correctly, I'm assuming that you're talking about Proposition 123 that we'll see on the ballot for the November 8th election coming up here. And what this will do is it will dedicate about $300 million a year of existing state revenue to affordable housing. And this represents a really landscape changing amount of money. This is a 6-fold increase from current funding levels, and will really help us transition off of some of the federal funding we've gotten to help support affordable housing during the COVID period. And this wouldn't raise taxes, which is nice. This is a measure that the Coalition for the Homeless is supporting, and we're really hoping that it will pass. And it is divided into 4 different groups, and some of that would be for people experiencing homelessness, some of that would be for renters, some of that would be for homeowners. It's really the whole housing spectrum. So I think it would really be a really impactful measure, and we definitely encourage that everyone votes yes, and talk with your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues about that. And this also tees us up nicely for next month's education series, which will be on affordable housing, and we'll have some great experts in to talk really about the funding and all of those mechanisms that hold us back or help propel us into more housing options. Until then, I encourage everybody to join our advocacy network. This is a great space to get more detailed updates and opportunities to get involved in things like voter registration, get out the vote work, which we're doing now, and other opportunities around advocacy, policy, and volunteering. And thanks, Shannon, for dropping that link in the chat there. Everyone feel free to visit that website. You can sign up there. We also just dropped some really new exciting resources through the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign. This is a national campaign, but we are managing our Colorado contingent. And we are just trying to highlight the intersectional nature of housing and so many other issues that affect all of us in community. And we have a 35-minute short documentary with some really fantastic interviewees. And we have 10 new fact sheets that I hope you'll check out. So with that, is that all we have for folks tonight? All right.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Great to see you. And thanks for the good discussion. See you next time.